Welcome friends to At Home with Theosophy. This is our last class for this series. We have been studying this book, Deity, Cosmos and Man by Geoffrey Farthing. And we have selected a few chapters from this book, and I'm presenting some excerpts from each of these chapters for us to discuss. Today we are going to talk about religion, how religions are seen from the point of view of the esoteric philosophy, and what's the relationship to what we call theosophy.
How did the religions of the world come about? The esoteric philosophy asserts the existence of an original source behind and beyond the various religions. Both Isis Unveiled and the Secret Doctrine are characterized by an enormous number of quotations from respected philosophical, religious, and historical sources that support this contention.
When Madame Blavatsky started writing and producing works, she said that all religions were coming from a common source. Although this idea can be traced to different authors and sages throughout history, at the time it was always a theory that was not widely accepted or not even widely known. At the time when Blavatsky claimed this, it was an idea that was even difficult to accept as a possibility. The Western view was that the past was a time of underdevelopment, that everything we have now is so much more advanced than things were in the past. And basically, the idea was, of course, in the West that the true religions came from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and all other approaches to religions were superstitions and was the result of savages. So Blavatsky says that all religions have a single common source. This idea was not only revolutionary at the time, but even today, although there is far more interfaith dialogue, most people from religions wouldn't accept this, because there is still the need to maintain a certain exclusivity. You know, if all religions come from the same source, then why would you prefer one religion over the other? So this is a quite revolutionary idea, and we are going to see how the Theosophical tradition presents it.
The Divine Instructors. In her writings, Madame Blavatsky wrote about a handful of primitive men in whom the spark of divine wisdom burned bright, remained the elect custodians of the mysteries revealed to mankind by the divine teachers. And tradition whispers what the secret teachings affirm, namely that these elect were the germ of a hierarchy which never died since that period.
If you look in different traditions, there is, especially in ancient traditions, there is this idea of a golden age where gods walked among men, and these gods taught humanity. Then there is a tradition that the pharaohs and the druids and all the shamans of the different traditions were descendants of these gods. They were representatives of these gods, because all these ancient traditions had in the memory of their tradition had this concept that there were some people who were far wiser than the rest of the community, and these people knew. They knew not only medicine and religion, but also they knew of agriculture or the political science that was able to be developed in the community. They had far wider knowledge. So the Secret Doctrine says that this tradition, or this memory that was kept in the different traditions is a reality. And there were always, since the beginning of humanity, some enlightened beings that had knowledge and that were the ones that guided the nascent, the new humanity.
The founders of religions were the authors of new forms and interpretations, while the truths upon which the latter were based were as old as mankind. Selecting one or more of those grand verities, actualities visible only to the eye of the real sage and seer, they revealed these truths to the masses. Thus every nation received in its turn some of the said truths, under the veil of its own local and special symbolism, which as time went on, developed into a more or less philosophical cultus.
So the idea here is that there is a common truth that the founders of religions were not people that invented these doctrines, and that explains why in many different traditions, even if they never knew each other, there are things that are common. There are many things that are common, even though many other things, of course, always vary, but there are symbols and there are general concepts, and even there is some architecture that is shared by different traditions. So the idea is that these people, they knew the truth, if we want to put it that way. They were wise people, and then they selected what kind of religious teaching they could give to their population, to the population in which they developed. So when selecting what aspects of truth was given, that selection, of course, was conditioned, at least to some extent, by the prevailing conditions of that culture. Maybe by the superstitions that culture had and the teacher wanted to correct, maybe by the challenges that tradition had, by the past, by many things, and also by the idiosyncrasy of the different cultures. Some cultures were more bent to intellectuality or to devotion or to practical aspects. So the teachers would shape the teachings so that they can help that particular community. If you see all religions in the past, they were all created within a particular community.
In an important article under the title, What is Truth?, Madame Blavatsky confronts the question of absolute and relative truth, the former being incommunicable to the limited consciousness of ordinary mortals, the latter being such rays of the sun of truth which that consciousness can assimilate. One of the quotations with which the article is introduced makes just this point, that the greatest adept living can reveal of the universal truth only so much as the mind he is impressing it upon can assimilate, and no more.
So this is an essential concept that is very important to keep in mind. The absolute truth is beyond words, is beyond thinking, is beyond the limitation of any description that can be given. So the absolute truth cannot be really communicated by any form. It is only a question of personal experience, let's say. Now, when we try to communicate that absolute truth into a particular person, then we have to adapt it. And first, the very fact of communicating it, we are communicating a symbol, not the fact. And then, as we said, you have to adapt it to the ability of the people to understand. If you are going to teach even science to kids in kindergarten or to a person in the university, you will explain the same facts in completely different ways. To the kids, you will explain it in a far more storytelling kind of way, and to people in the university, you can explain it in a more technical sense, although it is always, to some extent, a storytelling, a symbol for the facts that we give or we try to teach. So this is important to keep in mind, because many of the differences between the different religions are not because, or at least in the Theosophical view, are not because the source is different or because the truth that they are explaining are different, but it is because of this necessarily conditioned expression of truth and the adaptation to each of the different cultures.
Now, could you use an example of cooking and food? You know, there's basic ingredients of different cultures all over the world, but the different spices or, you know, the things that are available there to cook the food are all different.
Yeah, so you have to adapt the process of cooking to whatever is available to that place and time. And it's something that is very, if you think about it, is very obvious. It even happens in your family. If you have to explain something to different people, you explain it according to the background of that person, to the ability of that person. So this is one of the main reasons why different traditions seem to be so different. Also, there are some other factors that we are going to explore also, but it is important to determine whether the differences come from the origin or it comes from the expression.
Right, because in our family, there's always that person that you explain something and everyone gets a bit or piece of it, and that one person completely gets the opposite of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, all those things happen. Yes, go ahead, Ed.
There's another problem about interpreting what is being said, whether to interpret something literally or metaphorically. That seems to be also a difficulty that modern people seem to have. That didn't seem to be as big a problem in previous generations.
Yes, there is a tendency to interpret things literally, and as the quote says here, that any teacher can reveal as much as the mind that he is trying to impress can assimilate. So when the minds of the people there is either not very developed or too materialistic, or it's not a philosophical mind, then the more materialistic the mind, the more symbolically you have to speak, because you cannot really go into very abstract concepts, so you have to make them concrete, you have to make them more like a story. And it is that kind of mind, the one that will be more likely to take those things literally. Even in the Bible we have or in the Gospels we have an example of that, when Jesus would talk about in parables, and then the disciples would ask him, why do you talk to the people in parables? Well, this question first reveals that Jesus was talking to them in a different way. And then, of course, Jesus says, well, I talk to them in the language that they can understand, and to you I give you the mysteries of heaven or the kingdom of heaven. So you see how the more limited your understanding, the more symbolical it has to be, but then these people tend to take everything literally. So these are intrinsic problems in the transmission of truth, which inevitably produces different religions.
So what you're saying was the disciples were spoken about, the deeper aspects of the religion. And when Jesus spoke to the masses, he spoke in parables or symbols. And what we've done now is taken those symbols and use them literal sense.
Probably they did the same thing at the beginning of Christianity, except for the group of people that were always in every religion that could take all this more esoterically.
Passages such as these emphasize the distinction that must always be made between ultimate or absolute truth and the dogmas and scriptural presentations of relative truth that characterize the world's religions. The light of the true teaching has persisted throughout the ages, but in historical times, except for some few illumined men, it has shone only from behind the screen of superstition and ignorance in the forms of exoteric religions. In some of these, the light is so obscured as to be hardly perceptible. In some others, the veil is thinner, allowing beams of the pure light to penetrate it.
So this is what happens with most religions. The original teachings for all these facts that we have been discussing, and also because of other conditions, they become like a veil that may let more or less light of truth come through, but it's a veil nevertheless. Even the Theosophical teachings are a kind of veil, because any expression of truth is a veil upon the truth. Now, hopefully, the way that the teachings are expressed are as good as possible for us to perceive certain truths, and that is what the different teachers aim at. But of course, as we said, how skillfully they can present this will depend on the people that are listening.
Evolution of religion. Historical evidence shows that every human grouping has had as part of its culture a form of religion with an identifiable belief system and its related practices. Occult tradition, however, goes further back, taking us to the very early races of humanity. The mysteries of heaven and earth were revealed to the third root race, the first truly human race, by their celestial teachers in the days of their purity.
In the Theosophical view, there are 7 cycles of evolution for humanity on this planet that are called root races. And it is in the third cycle, in the third root race, that humanity awakens the mind. And from that early time, religion was taught in some way or the other. As we are going to see, formal religion took time in developing, but all races from the very beginning had some kind of religion. This is also something that surprises anthropologists, because they see that even in very primitive cultures, there is some kind of, for example, right for those who die. There is some kind of offering for those who die. There are graves with flowers, inside, or with whatever elements were around. And there are signs of a religious approach, even in the earliest human civilizations. So many anthropologists wonder how this developed. What is that religious spirit that seems to be with humanity from its very beginning? Now, in the Theosophical view, these early civilizations that anthropology knows about are not even the first civilizations that developed or through which humanity developed. There were even earlier ones, the third root race and many others in the fourth evolutionary cycle that we know nothing about at the moment.
Even the earliest Lemurians had a religion, and a most beautiful one, from the very beginning of their intellectual life. No sooner had the mental eye of man been opened to understanding than the third race felt itself one of the ever-present, one with the ever-present, as the ever-to-be-unknown and invisible all, the one universal deity. Endowed with divine powers and feeling in himself his inner God, each felt he was a man-god in his nature, though an animal in his physical self.
We are going to see the Theosophical scheme of evolution. The third root race, as we said, is the first one that awoke to the mind, to an intellectual understanding of human beings. These were called the Lemurians by Blavatsky. And she says that even with the Lemurians, with the first really human civilization, there was a beautiful religion. It was not a religion that was taught. It was a religion that was the natural result of their perception of being one with the whole. The idea in Theosophical view is that everything develops from a state of spirituality where there is pure and innocence. Then it becomes more and more material, and then there is a turning point with a return to a spiritual state, but that innocence and that ignorance in a sense, or lack of self-awareness that was at the beginning, now is turned into a self-conscious wisdom. So the third root race was very spiritual. As Blavatsky says, they all felt that they were one with the invisible all, with the universal deity. And even though they perceived their individual form, they knew that this was only their physical self, and that they were really one with God. So that was more or less the religious feeling in the third root race. Following this one came the fourth root race, that is the one that Blavatsky calls the Atlantean, the ones that lived in this continent that is called Atlantis, or that was called by Plato Atlantis.
Although Deborah has a question. As beginning souls or sparks, were we there?
Yes, the Lemurians were us in a previous evolutionary cycle. That is partially truth. Let us say that's the general truth. There are some souls that were more advanced than what the Lemurians were at the time, that they didn't need that very early experience. So some souls incarnate later when humanity evolves up to the state of evolution that the souls already had from a previous cycle of evolution in another planetary chain, let's say. But generally speaking, the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, these were all past incarnations of the current humanity.
Although formalized religion is not present among the Atlanteans, they had religion from the race before them, defined as the binding together of the masses in one form of reverence paid to those we feel higher than ourselves, of piety, as a feeling expressed by the child toward a loved parent. The rays of light from the third race became necessarily weakened as they were diffused and shed upon an uncongenial because too material soil. The generation of the pure religious impulse began with the Atlanteans.
So by the time that humanity developed in this more material race, more material from a physical point of view, from a spiritual point of view, this natural spiritual perception that the third root race had began to be lost, and the more physical perception that we have now began to be stronger and stronger. But they were still, in the aspect of religion, they were still like children, in the sense that it was the time of worship and adoration to their leaders, to, as I said, to the pharaohs and to the pharaohs and to the druids and to the leaders of their communities. They were regarded as gods or demigods, and they were followed and they were worshipped, just like it happens with children. But as time passed, and each civilization lasts for a few million years, according to the Theosophical view, as time passed and the children, in quotation marks, at the level of the soul, became teenagers, and they became the Atlantean race began to develop their own minds and began to think that they knew better, then these enlightened beings stopped incarnating and living among the living, simply because it was a time where civilization stopped looking up to them as the guides, as the parents. this was the time for humanity to begin to learn by himself, like when the teenager leaves the house and has to learn to be an adult by himself. And as this process went on, then religion became less and less spiritual and more materialistic.
Coming down now to historical times, we cannot help but recognize the materialization of even the God idea, the one, the absolute existence, unknown and unknowable to the conditioned human mind, becomes in the course of time an anthropomorphized deity with personal attributes. The rejection of these gods created by man in his own image and likeness, a blasphemous and sorry caricature of the every unknowable, may lead the superficial reader to the erroneous conclusion that the occult philosophy is atheistic and at best agnostic.
So right now we are in the fifth root race, the civilization that followed the Atlantean, and we also have a materialistic approach to religion, materialistic in the sense that we think of God as basically as if he were a person up there with personal feelings of hate and personal love and revenge and reward. We pray to God to get material benefits, to get the money that I want, or my team to win, or my country to defeat some other in battle, or all things that have to do with the material plane. So, as Blavatsky says in that quote, I think she said, God created, or maybe it was somebody else, but she quoted it. God created man in his own image, and since then men have been paying the favor back and creating God in his own image. So this is what Blavatsky says here. We create God as a projection of what we are. However, this if you see in Theosophy, many times you will find a strong criticism to this approach to religion and to the idea of God as we normally understand it. But that doesn't mean that the occult philosophy is agnostic or theistic, like saying that there is nothing divine.
The first stage of the human pilgrimage, variously described as the path of outgoing or the path of descent, is one of increasing materiality. In the case of our humanity, the lowest point of the descending arc was reached in the fourth root race. We are now at the beginning of the ascending arc, the emergence out of materiality into one of increasing spirituality.
So here
I took it turned.
No, this is the other way around. When I uploaded this, the software switched this. Okay, I'm sorry. So now use your imagination and see this the other way around. And so you have the first root race that comes down.
Here.
Yeah, the first root race comes down and then it goes up. We have the first and second root races. They were not really physical, not even physical. These were a process of materialization of humanity. Then the third root race is the Lemurian that we talked about. The fourth root race is at the bottom of the U-shaped diagram. This is the most material expression of humanity. And the fifth root race is just coming out of the bottom of the diagram. Then there are two more, the sixth and the seventh. So the third root race Blavatsky called Lemurian. She gave the name of Atlantean to the fourth root race. The fifth root race you will see in the Theosophical literature that is called the Aryan root race. And that's actually the technical term that anthropologists were using at the time. At the end of the 19th century, they took the word Arya, means noble, the noble ones, and this comes from the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit calls like the the sages, the Aryas, the noble ones. And that's how anthropologists, I really don't know why, chose to refer to the fifth root race. Probably it's part of, that that pride. We are the highest race. Now, after Hitler used this word, in the way that he did, anthropologists today, they use Indo-European race. They use the word Indo-European because they refer with this to all the races that came from India and developed into the European races and then into America. So that's how the evolution of the races go on. Then there will be a sixth and a seventh root races that are going to be more spiritual than these.
Esoteric philosophy and religion. It is sometimes mistakenly thought that the occult doctrine stands in opposition to religion. This is clearly not so. The preface to The Secret Doctrine, for example, states that among the aims of the work are two of particular relevance to our study, namely, to rescue the degradation of the archaic truths which are the basis of all religions, and to uncover to some extent the fundamental unity from which they all spring.
So, as I mentioned, Blavatsky is many times critical about organized religion. You can see that she criticizes a lot Christianity, and then Christians think that she is, anti-Christianity. She criticizes also Judaism, and then some people say she was anti-Semitic. Then she criticizes the Swamis, and then people, in the East, they say that Blavatsky was Buddhist. And even though she said that in her view, the religion that was closer to the original teachings was Buddhism, however, she also criticizes Buddhism. If you see there, so much so that most Buddhists don't accept Blavatsky as any exponent of Buddhism, because again she criticizes how regular Buddhism interprets many of the teachings, nirvana or this or that or reincarnation. She says that her teachers were Tibetan Buddhists, but she says that the current philosophy of most of the schools in Tibetan Buddhism, the Prasangika philosophy, she says that's only esoteric for the masses. The real esoteric Buddhism is not present in the schools of Tibetan Buddhism. So, in other words, Blavatsky criticized most of the exoteric expressions of religions, but her aim was not just to destroy religion, as sometimes we have political leaders or communists or others that they simply try to destroy religion. She was doing this for these two purposes: to rescue from degradation the archaic truths that are contained in religions, but then they are distorted by superstition and misunderstanding, and to show, at least to some extent, that there is a fundamental unity behind all religions. This is the reason why one of the reasons why her writings are so difficult to read, because she's constantly pulling up different traditions and she goes off the tangent to show how this religion says the same and this other religion. So to understand Blavatsky's writings, you have to know about Kabbalah, Hinduism, Buddhism, Greek philosophy, Chinese, because she's constantly bringing all those things. But her aim was very clear. She wanted to show that there was a universal truth. And that is the constructive aspect of her view about religion. There is a destructive one, the one where she's trying to get rid of or at least what she perceived as superstitions and wrong dogmas. But there was the constructive one that was trying to rescue the truth there and to show their unity.
When I was in India in November, we went and visited on the campus at Adyar. They have all the temples from all the different religions. So we walked around and got to see them. And then I started realizing that the early Theosophical leaders each had in their overall duty to help bring back these truths in each of the religions. So you see where Annie Besant kind of took on Christianity in that sense, and
the esoteric
Christianity. Alcott worked on Buddhism. Krishnamurti worked on Hinduism.
Yeah, Krishnamurti designed Bharat Samaj, that is the ritual for the Hindu temples. He designed one that was more, purer, at least that's what he said. And Besant also worked quite a bit with Hinduism.
And then Leadbeater worked with the liberal Catholic Church, so he kind of took the Christianity and made it more of what it was in the beginning. And then Alcott wrote the Buddhist Catechism.
So that was always part of and today, as I said, although there is far more, the first organization in beginning the interfaith dialogue was the TS. At the time, there was nothing like this. It was something that people rejected openly. The TS was attacked because it was promoting interfaith dialogue. And even if today there is far more, and that's great, and this is an advance for our civilization, normally the comparative study of religions, for example, among the scholars, focus more on the differences than on the similarities. And even the religious people, because they don't want to lose their identity, they still try to cling to the differences. So the approach of the TS is not very popular among religious people or among the scholars, because the TS is trying to point out to the unity, and nobody wants that really.
So if we as a humanity could trust and understand more, then all these religions, no religion would be lost, because each religion speaks a different language or to a different culture, or it has different rituals that will appease a different part of humanity. Her support for the religious principle as distinct from the exoteric religious beliefs and practices is made abundantly clear in this same introductory section of The Secret Doctrine. The esoteric philosophy is alone calculated to withstand, in this age of crass and illogical materialism, the repeated attacks on all and everything man holds dear and sacred in his inner spiritual life. Moreover, esoteric philosophy reconciles all religions, strips every one of its outward human garments, and shows the root of each to be identical with that of every other great religion.
So the first part of this quote, you can, where she says the esoteric philosophy only can withstand the attacks of materialism. At the time, you had in the West the dogmatic religion that could not accept even the advancing knowledge that was going on at the time. And then you had intelligent people, intellectual people that began to see that science was unveiling what they thought was a different universe. And most of the intellectual people and intelligent people in humanity were turning materialistic and atheistic, because they began to see how the way religion had explained, which was symbolical, but nobody regarded it in that way. So the way religion explained the world was no longer working. There is a scientist that wrote an important treatise, and then I think it was Napoleon that read it and asked him, why didn't you mention God once? The idea of God and the church and religion up to that point had always been prevalent. Everywhere in anything you would mention God or religion. And then the scientist said, I didn't, because that is a hypothesis that I don't need to explain the universe. That was truly the spirit of the age. The universe was just a clock, a mechanical clock. There were mechanical laws, as Galileo and Newton and many others were discovering, and you can explain the whole universe without having to introduce any God or spirituality or soul. Everything was a machine. So Blavatsky tried to present a philosophy that was rational, that was scientific in the sense of, based on logic, based on certain facts, based on research, but that was not materialistic. That's why the Theosophical teachings were presented in that way. And again, the TS was the first organization in bringing science and spirituality together, in beginning to write about the connection between science and spirituality. The second part of the quote, the reconciling all religions, we already talked about. Now, it's important to understand that Blavatsky doesn't say, or the Theosophical teachings are not saying that all religions teach the same. That is not true. There are obvious differences in religions. What they are saying is that all religions come from the same source. You can see many things that are common. You can see also many differences. Some of these differences were because they were trying to express different aspects of truth, or they were trying to correct misunderstandings in the previous culture, or because the followers of the sages did not really understand what they said, and then religion has to go on with whatever people understood. So common origin, but of course in all religions there are differences.
It proves the necessity of an absolute divine principle in nature. It denies deity no more than it does the sun. Esoteric philosophy has never rejected God in nature, nor deity as the absolute and abstract.
Ends. It's like for the reality.
It only refuses to accept any of the gods of the so-called monotheistic religions, gods created by man in his own image and likeness, a blasphemous and sorry caricature of the ever unknowable.
So this is the position of the esoteric philosophy. There is no negation of the deity in nature and behind the cosmos. There is one Mahatma letter that is quite famous, the Mahatma letter where Master KH, one of Blavatsky's teachers, denies the existence of God. And if you read that letter, it looks like he's making the case for a atheistic philosophy. But what they are, when you see his argument, what they always are denying is that anthropomorphic God that we believe in as a culture,
Ed says he thinks ens means being.
Being, yeah, you can. It's like
essence?
sat. You can translate it as being or the essence, or. Yeah.
It follows that the responsibility of those who have access to the teachings is twofold. A, to study further the doctrines of esoteric science, then as far as they can, to live accordingly, and B, to make those teachings more widely available. Madame Blavatsky wrote, "Our duty is to keep alive in man his spiritual intuitions, to oppose and counteract, after due investigation and proof of its irrational nature, bigotry in every form, religious, scientific, or social, and Kant, above all, whether as religious sectarianism or as belief in miracles or anything supernatural."
Blavatsky was, and the TS at the beginning, was quite confrontational in a certain sense. The TS and its members really believed that there was a mission that they had, which is what Blavatsky says here, to oppose, but then she says, after due investigation and finding proof of their irrational nature, to oppose bigotry, or in whatever form, scientific, religious, social. Of course, it's every person that opposes some other belief or tradition, they think that they have the truth, and then they go and criticize others, and they may be holding a superstition as much as the other person. So Blavatsky says, after due investigation and proof as much as you can, so this has to be a rational process. But once you perceive that something is untruth, that is a superstition, that is not good for humanity in one way or the other, our duty is to talk about this, to let people know about it, not try to convince them, not try to convert them to our own view, but to expose these things for those who want to listen, for those who may not know because they never heard about other option. And the reason for this criticism is to keep alive the spiritual intuitions of people. Now, we have a tendency to become more politically correct, to become more complacent. We want people to like us, so if you want people to like you, then you are not going to criticize, or you are not going to say something that they don't want to hear. So there is a fine balance between having this attitude of trying to get people to like us, and therefore becoming a mediocre and kind of useless organization. And the other extreme is to be too confrontational and to think that we know better than everybody. Between those two extremes, I think lies the right attitude in a theosophist. A theosophist may, humbly and kindly and not trying to hurt people, but we should try to point out to the what we think are mistakes in humanity, in the way we approach things, and be ready to recognize them also in our own tradition, in our own approach. If we do that, then the Theosophical Society can be a force in evolution. If we become complacent, then we will be pushed to the periphery of the evolution of humanity and being irrelevant for it.
What we have to do is to seek to obtain knowledge of all the laws of nature and to diffuse it, to encourage the study of those laws least understood by modern people, the so-called occult sciences, based on the true knowledge of nature instead of, as at present, on superstitious belief based on blind faith and authority, the key to Theosophy.
So in the view of the founders of the TS and the early TS, to know about all this was a form of service. It was a form of trying to help humanity. That's why Geoffrey Farthing at the beginning, he says that there are responsibilities for us. One, to study these teachings and to try to live according to them. That is part of it. And then to make those teachings more known. Not because we want to convince people, or because we want to draw people to the TS, or because we want to show that the Theosophical teachings are better than the rest. It's only that if we believe that there are certain views that are true, then our duty is to communicate them for those who may be benefited by them. And of course, in order to communicate, we have to know them. So the study of Theosophy and the propagation of the teachings should be taken as a way of service, again with humility, not believing that Theosophy is the last word of the truth, knowing that any presentation is limited. But if this threw light in our life, then we can try to share that and see if that can help others.
In answer to Deborah's comments, the teachings are beautiful, but what if I make mistakes in what my understanding of the teachings are? In understanding the teachings, I think the propagation of Theosophy or of any teachings is really a hard place to come from. Even when I'm talking to my family, I have a hard time saying the right thing, so I'm not going to offend somebody, or saying something that doesn't make it sound like a cult that I belong to and things like that. So it's taken me a long time and with a lot of study. And I think before we can get to the step of teaching the teachings to other people, if we just study them and learn to live them and remember that our main duty is service and kindness to humanity, then we can point out things that are true for us, and that way, instead of trying to correct someone else's view on things.
Yeah, we can always say, this is how I see this, and you say you don't have to wait and see and be an enlightened person to be able to say something. As long as you don't try to push your views to other people, you can offer them, and you don't need to claim I have the ultimate truth, because we don't. It is obvious that we don't understand the teachings in its totality, otherwise we would be enlightened. But you can offer, and you say, this is how I see this, and this is how this helps me. So with humility and honesty, you can offer whatever you have.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I think we could all teach by example. In other words, if these teachings are true at all, they change our behavior to be more compassionate and more other-oriented, and our behavior changes, and I think people see that.
Yes, and Kate adds, I think if you approach the topic as one of a personal philosophy, it rarely offends people in her experience. And yeah, that's true. I know for me, though, it seems like at the beginning, every time I opened my mouth, I felt like it sounded like I was attacking the other person or what they were doing. So there's that lag time between learning the teachings, living the teachings, and then be able to teach the teachings or share them. So it's not one on top of the other. It's a process.
Yes, everything in life needs experience, and with experience you begin to see what things work, what things don't work. Nobody likes for you to tell them that they are wrong. Nobody likes for you to say something that makes you appear better than them. When people feel in that way, then they tend to react. And we should not be talking from that point of view. I remember, for example, when I was in the laboratory where I worked, we ate all together during the lunch break, and I always had something vegetarian, and people first, would ask me why I was vegetarian, and I would never say, well, because being vegetarian is better, and it's better you don't kill animals and you don't. Then they react to that. But I said, it's just a question of personal experience. I have found out that if I don't eat meat, I feel better. I found that if I don't eat meat, I'm preserving the environment, or I feel that I'm contributing to that. So it's my choice. So if you put it in that way, they don't feel threatened, for example, by your life. And normally, at the beginning, they try to challenge you. And if you don't attack, then at the end they start saying, they start being interested in your point of view. So all this is part of the experience and learning, and always coming from not trying to convince the other, but saying, if it helps you, this is how I see it.
And sometimes even if it doesn't seem like it helps them, or there's a little, friction, doesn't mean that your point of view didn't get across. So we have to kind of make some space there between making people happy and, speaking what's true for us. A communication from one of the adept teachers to A.P. Sinnott shows the importance those teachers attach to a truthful theology. Remember, the sum of human misery will never be diminished unto that day when the better portion of humanity, destroys in the name of truth, morality, and universal charity the altars of their false gods.
So what he's saying here, Geoffrey Farthing is saying here, is that the adepts are interested in truth, morality, universal charity. If they are denouncing certain beliefs, it's because, at least in their view, these beliefs go against truth, morality, and charity. And in the Mahatma letters, they give some arguments, also Blavatsky and many others, as to why these beliefs are causes for suffering in their view.
This does not mean that Theosophy is either atheistic or pantheistic. In her writings, Madame Blavatsky dismisses this contention and then adds, "Our deity is neither in a paradise nor in a particular tree, building, or mountain. It is everywhere, in every atom of the visible as of the invisible cosmos, in, over, and around every indivisible atom and divisible molecule. For it is the mysterious power of evolution and involution, the omnipresent, omnipotent, and ever omniscient creative potentiality." The key to Theosophy.
So there are these two possibilities here, that when people, especially at the beginning, when Theosophy would say all this in a culture that was not used to considering religion in any other way than the Judeo-Christian tradition, they interpreted Theosophy as atheistic or pantheistic. Pantheism is the teaching that the divine is in nature and is nature, that there is nothing else than nature, and nature is divine. So the pantheistic view, as it is normally interpreted, doesn't accept that there can be something beyond nature. Actually, pan means nature. So Theosophy is not pantheistic in that sense. As Blavatsky says, the deity is part of the visible cosmos, what we can call nature, and also the invisible cosmos, beyond what we call nature. Or as she says, in, over, and around everything. So later in the 20th century, there was a word invented or created by philosophers to denominate this kind of view. They call it panentheism. So the panentheist view is the Theosophical view, is the view that the deity is not out there, separated from humanity or from the cosmos, and the deity is not only in nature, that the deity has two aspects, the immanent, interpenetrating everything in nature, and the transcendent, being beyond nature. So that is the panentheistic view. That's, I think, how you spell it.
Is man then to be deprived of comfort and strength in his hour of trial? No, indeed. For Madame Blavatsky reminds her readers more than once of the words of Paul, whom she acknowledged to be an initiate, in his letter to the Corinthians. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you?
The problem with the panentheistic view and the Theosophical view in general is that for most people it's too abstract, because we are used to relating to the idea of God as a person, like a big father outside of ourselves that will come and help us and rescue us or prevent us from suffering. So when you talk about a deity, a concept of the deity that is far more subtle and abstract, then many people feel that is not appealing, because they need to believe in a heavenly father taking care of them. Now, as Geoffrey Farthing says here, that doesn't mean that the divine is not a power that can help. As St. Paul said, we are temples of the divine. The divine is expressing through us. The divine is always available, Actually, the divine is our true essence, not only our Father, it is our true essence. So since we are the temples of the divine is always available, but not as a person out there. It's available as the power behind what we really are, as the wisdom and the love behind of what we are.
Again, in the Secret Doctrine, there is this significant passage. Alone, the ever unknowable and incognizable causeless cause should have its shrine and altar on the holy and ever untrodden ground of our heart. Invisible, intangible, unmentioned, save through the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. Those who worship before it ought to do so in the silence and the sanctified solitude of their souls, making their spirit the sole mediator between them and the universal spirit.
So you see, this is how HPB would consider or regard this deity, the causeless cause of everything, that is invisible, intangible, unspeakable, except through the still small voice. This is from, I'm pretty sure, from the Christian tradition. And that to worship it, you don't need to go to a temple. This is, by the way, the same that Jesus said, when the Pharisees were praying in the middle of town aloud so that everybody would see how pious he was. And Jesus said, you should pray to the Father, in your room, in solitude, in silence. Well, this is basically the same that Blavatsky is saying here. This worship should be done in the silence and the solitude of the soul. It's the silent prayer that the Christian mystics would talk about, a prayer in which there is no separation of a person asking or even praising or giving thanks to another entity, but the prayer that comes in the silence of this deep state of consciousness where one becomes one with the deity. So this is what we call meditation today. But that is basically the same or very similar to what Jesus said.
For this reason, she went on to say, the world needs no sectarian church, whether of Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Swedenborg, Calvin, or any other, there being but one truth. Man requires but one church, the temple of God within us, walled in by matter but penetrable by anyone who can find the way. The pure in heart see God.
Mm-hmm. So this is the end of the class for today, with this presenting how Blavatsky conceived the divine and what kind of relationship we have with the divine.
What about bake sales?
What's a bake sale?
Yeah, sorry, Ed. There's some things that Pablo doesn't get. He doesn't know a bake sale. In churches, they have bake sales to bring in fundraisers.
Okay, yeah. Yes, and it's not that she says we need no sectarian churches. I mean, she would not have a problem if you want to learn about the teachings of Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad or whoever else. She would have no problem in having places where you can go and learn about these teachings and learn from each other. What she's talking against is the sectarianism that is associated normally with churches. You can say, I'm Christian because the way that truth is presented through the words of Jesus resonate with me and help me. So even if we say that all religions are sacred, that all religions come from the same source, you can still prefer one presentation to the other. This doesn't devoid religions of their purpose. It does devoid them of their exclusivity, of saying my religion is the highest, is the only truth. And that it does, this is why most religions reject this view. But if they could understand better this and they could generate this sense of universal brotherhood, they still could say, to me, the best path is the Buddhist or the Muslim or whichever path. That is not being denied by this approach. And then everybody could still follow their religions if they have any. So is there any other comment or question about the view of religion and either the origin of the regular religions or the Theosophical view on religion and the deity? You can use your mic if you have one. You can click on the little icon with the man raising his hand.
Man?
Yeah, it have short hair. It has to be a
so
man.
That means, Deborah's going to give it a try.
Yes, go ahead, Deborah. Yes.
Hi. Is it working? Hi. Well, it's just a little thing. But tonight, one of the reasons I was a wee bit late was that 2 young Mormons came to the door. And they've only been here from Ohio for a few weeks, but they were just so tender and sweet, and so they wanted to know my faith, and so I told them I was Christian, but that I think I'm a Heinz 57 of all faiths. So we had just this very, very nice little talk. I guess in my comment earlier, it's not so much that I'm, in conflict with anyone, and certainly not these two young men, but with my family or friends, is that I'm worried about saying things wrong. Sometimes people want to understand, like just simply because of the books I have, and so we'll get into these discussions, but I do worry more about explaining it the wrong way. I've told so many people about the Theosophical Society. I don't know if anybody ever goes, but someday someone might. And so I think that's my bigger worry, is saying something that could be potentially wrong versus just being a little more silent about it. Also, I guess some of my family have noticed that I'm more content in my life. I don't have the sadnesses that I used to have. So those are my comments, and I just really like seeing this about other faiths. My grandmother always said they're just another language talking to the one God. Over.
Yes, as Ed said, the example is always the best, publicity that can be there. And you know that phrase, your actions are so loud that I cannot hear what you say. Yeah. But at the same time, you don't have to cling too much to that, because many times unconventional views will make you do things that are unconventional, and people may judge your philosophy as being wrong simply because you do things that they don't understand. So we shouldn't even get caught up in the idea that we should be an example, and act as people would admire or expect us to act. All these considerations, I think, are wrong. What we have to do at any moment is our best, honestly, and that's all we have to do. If the result of that is misunderstanding, it's not really our problem. You do your best. There is always a possibility in life, in any case, that your action, no matter how well-intentioned it is, may result in something good or bad for the other person. But then we cannot prevent that. We cannot avoid that. All we have to make sure is that, whatever we do it to see if that can help. And then how that results is a question of karma. Your karma, the other person's karma, the collective karma around. So we don't have to worry about the results. You just about the causes, about your action. And as you may say something that is wrong and cause some misunderstanding, or you may help a person. So because of the fear of saying something wrong, are you going to refrain yourself from offering something that may be good for the person? That would be selfish. So you just do your best.
Yeah, I, as a former teacher and a parent and a wife, so much of what we say is misunderstood or not heard or, taken. And like Pablo said, people take what they want from any conversation that we give. So I think a lot of it has to do with what our intention is and, where our heart is when we're talking to other people. Mm-hmm. And Ed said another good thing is to recommend a book or a YouTube video. And there's a lot of pamphlets that the TS has that I'm fairly new to Theosophy. I only started 10 years ago, and it really takes a lot and a long time to learn how to speak Theosophy. And I know there's so many things. I used to give tours. I was at the information department in Wheaton, and I know I'd come back from a tour and say something to somebody, said, yeah, I just said this, and they'd kind of look at me cross, and I was like, oh, that was wrong, right? And nobody ever came back, or anything, like that. So I think
came back. What do you mean? Came
back and said, I want to renounce my membership because because I don't believe you.
Yeah, no, those things don't happen. We don't have so much influence on people,
right? That was
so
my point.
For good or for ill, we don't have. So I don't think we have to worry about that. Of course, we should try to understand all this as best as possible, so that we can help as best as possible. But then we just have to give whatever little we have at the moment, and also see. I never try to give, my opinion unless it is asked. Obviously, a person, for example, the Mormons coming to talk to you, it's not that they come and they say, we want to inquire into the truth of this statement. They are there to promote their point of view. So I would not try to argue and make them change their view. They are not there for that reason. Our family many times also are not there to have a different point of view. But whenever a person has a problem that cannot see how to deal with it and ask you, then you can give your point of view. Then you can offer this. When the person is asking, is trying to see. When they are not, then it's, I personally don't offer a different point of view. Any other comment or question? All right, so thank you everybody for participating, for being here every week. We hope that this series is useful to you, and Jim is going to send the link for this last recording. In the fall, God willing, or karma willing, or the deity willing, or randomness willing, whatever it is, we are planning on doing a class on the secret doctrine, and this sets some foundations for certain concepts. So stay tuned, and we'll let you know about that class. So thank you everybody. Have a good night and a great
summer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.